New Pac-12 Commissioner Teresa Gould has got a 2-year contract, which means she needs to start making moves.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, and the portal. All of that covered here daily and more. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Pac-12, Kansas extends Lance Leipold. Thoughts on that with Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks coming up, and North Carolina State quietly having one of the best off seasons in all of college football with a favorable schedule to boot. But we start with the Pac-12, which, as new Commissioner Teresa Gould made it clear in her press conference, is not going away. Everyone wants to refer to it as the Pac-2. You can do that. Everyone knows what you're talking about. But the intellectual property, the name, the Pac-12 continues on. And she said it has meaning, that the fans care about it, that it has a brand, it has an identity, and they want to keep all of that going. And the conference is to continue. In what form or fashion, that remains to be clear. But the 2-year contract puts quite the hurried deadline on the Pac-12's new commissioner. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense because one option that is absolutely on the table, though not the only option, is doing a reverse merger with the Mountain West, in which the Mountain West would dissolve and all 12 schools would join the Pac-12, play under that label, and that'd be your new conference. You can call it whatever you like, but they would play under the Pac-12 label, and that league would exist, and that would allow Washington State and Oregon State to avoid paying hefty fees to the Mountain West for poaching some of their teams, which is what happens when one team changes conferences, is money is owed to the conference in which the school is leaving. But according to USA Today, if the Mountain West were to lose some but not all schools to the Pac-12, the penalty would be payable because Oregon State and Washington State reportedly have a war chest because of the settlement they reached with the 10 departing schools that are going to power conferences and leaving them behind of about $255 million. Now, they can spend that money however they'd like. They can spend that money at the conference level. They can spend that money individually. It's theirs. They're the board members of the Pac-12, and the money belongs to the Pac-12 conference. So if it's 10 schools costing $122.5 million, what would 6 schools cost? Closer to $100 million? Well, they've got that. That's doable. Now, what has been pointed out to be by many Mountain West fans out there who don't necessarily want to see their conference implode, a la the Pac-12, is that this arrangement that involves a scheduling deal between Oregon State and Washington State and the Mountain West also has these penalties baked in for 2 years beyond the agreement, which goes for this college football season upcoming and the next one. So if in 2026, which is when Oregon State and Washington State have to rebuild the conference by with new members in some form or fashion, if they poach Mountain West teams in 2026 or 2027, they'd have to pay these fees. But according to USA Today, if that number is $122.5 million for 10 schools, Oregon State and Washington State can afford that. There are other liabilities and payments that are being paid out with things like the Comcast overpayments or George Kliavkoff's buyout, the Holiday Bowl's lawsuit against the Pac-12, and what have you. $122.5 for 10 schools. That's perfectly manageable. I don't think they would go 10 schools. If you're not going to have a full-on reverse merger with the Mountain West, I think the sweet spot is probably 4 or 6 from the Mountain West, and then you find 4 or 6, but probably 4 more schools elsewhere, and you've got the premier Group of 5 football conference in the entire country. And so Kirk Schultz of Washington State spoke about how access to the playoff is paramount. That's what he's prioritizing for his school. And that's why he voted to approve the 5+7 format, because it makes sense not just for this year, but for next year. Oregon State and Washington State, if they were to make a run and have outstanding 11-1 or 12-0 seasons, I don't know that they're capable of doing that, but That's, of course, where you want to be thinking as a university and as a football program. You're not getting in because there's no conference championship to play in. You don't have 8 or more teams. So the Pac-12 lives on. Teresa Gould has to start making moves and figure out what the next steps are going to be. Now, among her top priorities are figuring out the media rights situation. Pac-12 media rights are so back. Yeah, baby. They're so back. What a time. Oh, what a time that was on formerly Locked On Pac-12. RIP. But Oregon State and Washington State have to figure out where they're going to broadcast their home football games. All their other sports are taken care of because they're in the West Coast Conference for things like men's and women's basketball, or Oregon State independent with baseball. The Pac-12 networks are going to continue operating for those interested in that particular part of the discussion, but all the non-football sports are taken care of. But each team has got their home football games to sell, 6 and 7 respectively, and so someone's got to broadcast them. And I had so many flashbacks. I had more flashbacks than I could possibly express in a reasonable amount of time here on the segment to keep your interest level in this particular show when I read the statement from Teresa Gould saying, "We have a lot of interest in our media rights and we're pleased with where they're at." Like, whew, boy, I've heard that one before. Fool me once. Fool me once. But there are legitimately some games that have historically been appealing to television networks. Now, who wants to buy games a la carte? Kind of a unique situation, not unprecedented. We've seen FBS independents before. In college football, they've had broadcasts for their home games. Would you look to a streaming partner there? I don't know. If you could find a linear partner, that probably would be ideal, but maybe a streaming partner is willing to give you a little more. I mean, I know there are some Oregon State and Washington State fans out there, particularly in the online sphere, who think the Apple deal actually would have been good. So maybe you go to Apple and say, do you want to dip your toe in the water on college football broadcast? Because here you go, pay us X amount of dollars and you can have these games. But Washington State, Texas Tech, people need to be able to watch that game. Texas Tech fans or Big 12 fans listening to or watching this, do you want to be able to watch that game? Yeah, you should. Yeah, you absolutely should. How about Washington and Washington State playing the Apple Cup? How about Oregon State playing the Civil War? One of those is a neutral site game, the Battle of the Washington Schools. The Oregon schools are playing in Corvallis. Those games got to be on TV somewhere. I can't imagine those games that regularly pick up multiple million people watching on TV are not going to be appealing to somebody somewhere. The question is who? The question is, will it be a Fox, a CBS, who say, let's shift around the Mountain West schedule and put this game here and that game there so that we can make room for this game over here? Or will they have to go and find their own option? Will ESPN pick up one here or there? Probably not. Their docket is likely pretty full. Or would you go to an Amazon or an Apple, somebody like that, and say, hey, do you want to have these games? I mean, my personal favorite option for the Pac-12, back when that was, still an option, RIP, was always Ion TV. College football, transition into Criminal Minds, that's a heck of a way to end a Saturday night. I'm just saying, if I do that and then I wake up and I'm watching Red Zone on Sunday, that's a pretty high quality television viewing experience. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just spitballing. But that's everything that you need to know about the Pac-12's new situation there. The schedule is out. Might get to that next week on the show for the Mountain West and the Pac-12 and their scheduling arrangement and such. But boy, we are right back into the thick of media rights and realignment and all this sort of stuff. But Teresa Gould, clock's ticking. Clock is ticking, Commissioner Gould. You got to make sure that you're on top of it, making moves, making phone calls, have a plan, understand your options. Fascinating stuff. We'll continue to cover, as always, here on the show. Lance Leipold's got a new contract with Kansas. Does that mean he actually sticks around? Well, here's what this means. We're talking about Nissan. Yeah, that's right. That's how we roll sometimes. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone like I got to do in my 2000 Lexus ES300 or Google Maps and Google Play Store, those things are built in to the Nissan Rogue, the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for whatever your next adventure is. They've also got the Nissan Pathfinder, which has room up to 8, the Nissan Armada that'll change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Go check them out. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them out at shopnissanusa.com. That's nissanusa.com. Go over there and check them out today. Kansas extends Lance Leipold, and he is, well, looks like going to be the man for the Kansas Jayhawks. Derek Johnson is the man to join me here and talk about everything that means. Host of Locked On Jayhawks here at the network, joining me on Locked On College Football. So, Derek, almost around $7 million per year for Lance Leipold. He has been talked about in coaching circles for quite a while because he's taken a job that, quite frankly, has been an absolute train wreck for the better part of a decade and a half. And he has, at the very least, stabilized it into something that is, successful, that is tenable, that is something you can at least be proud of or be interested in. At the very least, it wasn't that before. Does this contract extension and raise keep his name out of the coaching carousel going forward?
Unfortunately, no, it does not, because the buyout has actually been, it's not a big number. It's $5 million, right? I mean, that's pennies in today's day and age in college football, right? It did not actually add any extra years onto the contract of Lance Leipold. Now, the way I'm kind of taking that, he is a bit of an older coach, in his late 50s. Maybe he's one of those guys who doesn't want to be coaching when he's 70 years old. Maybe, that's breadcrumbs to be like, hey, when my contract expires in 2029, I'm out. I'm going to go use this $7 million a year and go live on a beach somewhere or do something fun, right? So I don't think it detracts that, but I think more than anything, what detracts it for me is what's happened these last two off seasons. Last year it was unfortunate. It was Kansas makes it back to a bowl game, and it just so happens that the two biggest jobs that would have made sense for him were Wisconsin, which is where he got his start with Barry Alvarez, his GA, Nebraska. His wife's from Omaha, and he coached on staff there. He coached at Omaha, and all this stuff happened to come open. Now, maybe neither one actually offered him the job. Maybe they chose Matt Rule and Luke Fickell over him, and he never even got the offer. And maybe he would have taken it, maybe not. Who knows? Same thing with the Washington job this year, right? Maybe they offered Lance Leipold first. Maybe they offered Jed Fish first. I don't know. Maybe if he would have been offered it, he would have taken it. I don't know. But at this point, where you've made it past a couple off seasons, you're rolling now. I think Kansas is going to have a good shot in the Big 12 this year. I mean, you look at some of the odds to win the league. It's not unthinkable that Kansas could be in a college football playoff this year. Not that they're the favorite, but they're one of the 3 or 4 favorites in the Big 12 coming in. So it's not going to remove his name from the searches, but I guess it makes it a little bit less likely.
I mean, that's something. That's got to be something for Kansas fans. But the point you made about the buyout is a good one, because $5 million as a buyout, that's got to be amongst the lowest for guys that have a long-term contract who the universities have invested in to be as their head coach. But the point you made about the playoff is a fascinating one, because Kansas's win total is 8.5. That's second in the Big 12 only to Utah and Kansas State, who, according to the odds, are the top 2 favorites in there. If Lance Leipold, I think, just appears in the Big 12 championship game, he doesn't have to win, because that sentence in and of itself, right? For those who are fans listening to or watching the show of other conferences and aren't familiar with the dynamic here, this is Vanderbilt making a conference championship game. Granted, the league is not as hard, but if you go to the ACC, this is Boston College making an ACC championship game. This is, in the Pac-12, Colorado before Deion Sanders making a conference championship game. That's what it would look like. So if Kansas has that sort of season, let's say they go 9-3. Let's say they find themselves in the Big 12 title game against Utah or Kansas State. What happens with Lance Leipold? Is that his last season at Kansas?
So his son is a junior, going to be a senior in high school. So, I mean, you could realistically line it up hey, he wanted to stick around, let his kid finish out high school, go to college. That would be this next year. You have all these players who decided to come back for another year at Kansas that give them the opportunity to do this, whether it's in the secondary with guys like Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson, who should be vying for, all conference and possible All-American awards at the end of the year. Same with Devin Neal, Jalen Daniels, if he can stay healthy. You have all these guys that decided to come back. And after this year, you're going to lose, it's like 30-something seniors at the end of the 2024 season. So if you are trying to line it up and say when is a good time to take another job, that would be the good time, right? You go, like you said, 9-3, you make a Big 12 title game or something, or you win a 10th game in a bowl game, whatever it is, an amazing season. People were, I remember talking on shows about by year 3, when they hired Lance Leipold from the get-go, which he came in the spring of one year. So even his first year was kind of like year 0. If you could be in a bowl game by year 3, that would be great. And for so many years, we heard Kansas fans say, I'm not asking you to win championships or do this and that. Just hold me over till basketball season. Go 6-6. But now that they're here, now that you've made back-to-back bowl games, now that you won 9 games last year, and you even had to deal with some more injuries to Jalen Daniels, you had 3 games among those 4 losses that were one-score losses that were kind of coin flip losses that easily could have gone the other way. It's like, yeah, hey, we're here. Let's take advantage of this. Let's win the Big 12. It's open now. Texas and Oklahoma are gone. Let's go to the college football playoffs. So it's funny how much the hope has changed. But yeah, I mean, that is a real possibility that if you're looking at the absolute maximum ceiling you could go to, maybe Lance Leipold goes, hey, I've set it up for this year. We've already seen some assistants leave this past offseason. Maybe this would be the prime year to leave at the end of it. Or maybe, if that stuff does happen, they view it as, hey, we've got things rolling now, and this will be the good foundation and base because they did bring in some good recruits. Like they have the best recruit that they've ever gotten in the 24/7 sports recruiting era with Deshaun Warner coming in. So I don't know. And it's impossible to tell and partially depends on some of the jobs that would be offered. But, yeah, that is not a illogical view of what could possibly happen, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, when you turn around a place like Kansas and cause that shift in expectations for the fans, it gets people's attention. He was tied to the Michigan State job, Texas A&M, Washington as well. His name was tossed out, and now the Rays comes in. But you talked earlier that there was no, extension on the number of years for this particular deal that Lance Leipold assigned to be the Kansas head coach. With the small buyout, does that make it feel even more so to you with the 30 seniors that are leaving after this year, that he will entertain offers after this season, make the most of it, and then do kind of what Kalen DeBoer did at Washington, which is, I was here for a good time, not necessarily a long time, but everyone is leaving, and this is about to be a reset, and I'm not about that. And he goes to try and take a more high-profile job where the cupboards are much more well-stocked.
So Kansas fans will point to like every, podcast or show that he appears on or media availability or opportunity. He shoots that stuff down and really talks about like, hey, I want to be here, all this stuff. But as you know, in the world of college football, word ain't oak. It doesn't stick with what it is. It's not as firm as you would expect it to be. We see all the time coaches say one thing and then go the other place because you're not going to come out as coach and be like, yeah, you know what? I got one foot out the door. I'm entertaining this other. That doesn't happen. So I do think it is a possibility, but the longer he does stick around at Kansas, and I go back again, the offseason before the Wisconsin and the Nebraska ones, those would have made a lot of sense. He does have Midwest ties. I do think it would have to be the right job, especially if, his wife seems to really love Lawrence. His family seems to like being here, that it would have to be something really worthwhile to entertain the offer. And so I don't think like if Michigan State would have offered him the job, I don't know, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know if he would have taken that one. There were some questions about NIL, and that's something he really cares about. Like some of the stuff that he's done, because he got a contract extension last offseason too. And part of what he had in last year's extension was basically a clause in there about like helping out with NIL from the donors and sustaining some of that. This contract extension involved pay raises for the assistant coaches. So he is very concerned about the guys around him, the players around him, how everybody else is being taken care of. And I think if he were to be available, if he were to be open to taking another job, every year that you retain him, if you're Kansas, he's a year older. He's moving into his 60s. Every year you retain him, the more the program gets better. The closer Kansas gets to their new stadium being built and completely finished and everything, the more you can maybe stack up recruiting classes like this past one where, they didn't rank super high in the national rankings because they only brought on like 15 kids, but per some of their, what we're used to seeing, it's the best class we've seen Kansas bring in, which, again, if you compare it to like some SEC schools, it's not going to jump out or anything. But, it's kind of one of those weird things where I don't know. It's like the longer he stays, you're not more confident from the standpoint that he's like fending off all these other jobs. You're just more confident because you wonder if those calls stop coming, that all these schools, you see him pop up on all these lists that Bruce Feldman releases or all these sites release. And as he gets older, do other schools start to be like, hey, this guy keeps entertaining other jobs, but he's not taking any of them. So I don't know. I've approached this whole thing like this. I am not going to be shocked if Lance Leipold ends up being a coach at another school, but I'm not actually going to expect it. And if that thing happens, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. And I think a lot of Kansas fans are the same way, because with the amount of schools that you listed, there were some this year, there were some last year, you can just constantly work yourself into a cycle of like, oh, here we go again.
Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks at D Johnson Radio on X, formerly known as Twitter. Derek, thank you so much. Great stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
NC State's win total is 8.5. Over or under? You tell me. Actually, I'm going to tell you because that's kind of how the show works. Before we get to NC State, you need to know today's episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins, no matter what it is. Just a winning $5 bet, any one. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. They've got everything you could want. They've got college football odds. We're going to talk about North Carolina State's win total. I like them over 8.5. I'll tell you why in just a moment. But if you want to bet the Wolfpack or you want to bet any other college football team's win total or championship odds, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. NC State is quietly having one of the best off seasons in all of college football, and they are set up to thrive in the ACC. If you want to talk about a dark horse contender in the ACC in 2024, I'm going to suggest you examine the North Carolina State Wolfpack under Dave Doeren, a guy who is not going to be coaching for the first time this year. He's going to have a veteran quarterback as well. But let's just look at things from the outset before we dive into the nitty-gritty, into the details there. Do you know who has brought in the 11th best transfer portal class in all of college football? Surprise, surprise. It's North Carolina. They've got a top 30 high school recruiting class as well with some pretty highly rated blue chip prospects. So Dave Doeren has never won 10 or more games as North Carolina State's head coach, which is amazing because he's won a lot of football games. He's built a very high floor but somewhat low ceiling program. And they remind me a lot of Utah. Utah, for many, many years under Kyle Whittingham, they went about their business. They weren't flashy. They just showed up, did the work, won games, but they weren't getting to that next level. And then eventually they got there. And you know how they got there? They elevated the quarterback position. There have been some good quarterbacks to suit up for the Wolfpack over the years, but do you know who they have coming in? Do you know the name Grayson McCall? I do. You may as well. He's played for the Chanticleers, alma mater of Dustin Johnson, a two-time major champion, and a World Series or College World Series national champions back in, I want to say 2016, in that sort of timeline there. That's where Grayson McCall has been playing college football for the past, not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 football seasons. Past 5. This is year 6. So you give me a coach that has been in his position winning a lot of football games for over a decade. You give me a 6th-year quarterback who in his last 4 seasons as a starter has not completed less than 67% of his throws. playing for Coastal Carolina. You give me a top 12 transfer portal class that includes 10 players from Power 4 schools. You may be wondering, well, what about the other side of the portal? Who left North Carolina State? I'll tell you who. 20 players. You may hear that number and think, well, that's not going to go well. That's going to be But here's what you need to pay attention to. Where are those players actually ending up? Of the 20 transfer portal departures, just 5 are going to play at Power 4 schools next year. So you lost 5 Power 4 caliber starters and you brought in 10. One of whom, and by the way, that's not counting Grayson McCall. That's just looking at players that came from a certain caliber of school. So you've got a team that went 9-4 last year, lost their bowl game to Kansas State, or they would have had that first 10-win season. That's happened a couple times for the Wolfpack under Dave Doeren. So you may look at that track record and say, I don't know about 9 regular season wins. Can they really do that? That would be replicating what they did in last year's regular season, by the way, which is go 9-3. You look at the ACC and you think Florida State, as you should. They should be the favorites. They've probably got the best roster. Miami with Cam Ward has got a great offensive line. They're upgrading at quarterback with Cam Ward back there. They're going to be able, I would think, with Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, their offensive line coach, to run the football. That's what their track record has always shown. They're going to have one of the most talented rosters. Who's third? Who's third in the ACC? You can go a lot of different directions. The answer may very well be NC State. Quietly, very quietly, they won 9 games. And very quietly, they've brought in a great transfer portal and high school recruiting class. They were 6-2 in the ACC last season with wins over Miami and Clemson. And then you look at NC State's schedule and you go, wait a minute, their win total is what now? It's 8.5. Holy smokes. Holy Toledo. Holy Wolfpack and other broadcaster expressions. Give me the over 8.5 for North Carolina State. So they begin on a Thursday. That's August 29th with Western Carolina. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they win that game. Then it gets interesting. It gets interesting fast. And if NC State wants to establish themselves not just as a dark horse ACC contender, but as a college football playoff contender, because remember, we've got 12 teams to put in the playoff this year. How about their week 2 game? This will be one of the most underrated, overlooked non-conference battles in week 2 of the college football slate. A lot of great games out there. But are you thinking about Tennessee and North Carolina State playing in a neutral site game at the Duke's Mayo Classic, Bank of America Stadium? Now, this is a neutral site game in the same way that when Georgia plays in Atlanta, it's a neutral site game. That game is in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the crowd will lean towards the Wolfpack there, though I don't doubt the Vols' ability to go all the way out east. And it's really not that far for them. So that's a huge game. Huge game. Then you play Louisiana Tech before Clemson is played on the road. That's the ACC opener. Again, a team that they beat last year, who everyone has legitimate questions about with their coaching staff and their refusal to use the transfer portal. And NC State doesn't have that issue. They're not just relying on high school kids to grow. That's what Clemson's doing. Fascinating experiments. You've got the returning head coach, quarterback, and offensive coordinator. But is Clemson still Clemson? I've seen NC State beat him before. They did it last year. They'll have to do it on the road. That's tougher, no doubt. The next 2 games, get a load of this, Northern Illinois and then Wake Forest. So in their first 6 games, in their first 6 games, I am seeing a minimum of 4 wins, and I don't see how it's not 5. Between Tennessee, that's starting a quarterback who's only played in a bowl game, Nico Iamaleava, very talented, but that'll be his 3rd college football game as a starter. And going to Clemson, that's felt like a program that doesn't quite have its full identity and, lost to a Duke team last year early in the season. They could certainly lose, even at home to North Carolina State. What What exactly about that first half of the season doesn't scream 5-1? So you may be wondering, well, Spence, what about the back half of the schedule? Certainly things start to get tougher. Nope. Nope. I'm telling you, this is a manageable schedule for Dave Doeren and company. You've got Syracuse at home. That's going to be led by Kyle McCord. By the way, they've got a new head coach, and Kyle McCord, a guy who was like this close. I mean, literally one drive away from playing for a Big Ten title and likely a college football playoff. He's at Syracuse now. They're going to travel all the way to Raleigh. And then the first cross-country trip with this new ACC schedule in which you'll play at Cal. That's a long trip to go to Berkeley. Then host Stanford the next week. Stanford's win total is 3.5. I think that's a little bit low. I think that's a little bit low, but is that a winnable game for NC State? Yeah, you're probably going to have the more talented roster in that game. You're going to have the best quarterback, probably the better roster, and the more experienced coach. Interesting. So between Syracuse, Cal, and Stanford, two of which are at home, who's seeing less than 2 wins there? Suddenly we're up to 6. We're up to maybe 7 wins at that point with 3 games to go. Then they host Duke, first-year head coach Malik Cunningham in at quarterback, the transfer from Texas because the carousel works in that sort of way. Then a bye, a late season bye to set up 2 road games to end the season. Not ideal, but the opponents they're playing, I've seen tougher. At Georgia Tech, at North Carolina. North Carolina without Drake May, that is what I call a pullback team. Georgia Tech, low floor, low ceiling sort of team. Bowl game, they were in a bowl game last year. But do you think Georgia Tech can think powerhouse? I mean, find me the 3 losses in here. Let's say the worst comes to pass. They start 4-2 in their first 6, and you play Tennessee and Clemson. Who's giving them their second loss on the back half of their schedule? This could be a great year for NC State. They've had a great offseason, love the quarterback move, returning coach, had a good year in 2023. I think NC State could have their first 10-win season under Dave Doeren this year, and they are a sneaky team that you best not ignore in the ACC and maybe even for the college football playoff. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.